The compass has never worked. Not once, not ever. The needle just sits there pointing slightly left of nowhere, frozen like it made a decision a long time ago and never reconsidered. I've had it since I was 9. My father found it in a salvage yard, same kind of place I've spent most of my adult life working in, and he gave it to me because he thought a broken thing could still be worth keeping. I stopped trying to understand his logic around the same time I stopped trying to fix the compass. Some things you just carry. I was checking my kit on the shuttle when they briefed us on the assignment. Standard demobilization contract. Assess the salvageable components of a disabled Xalian flagship. Catalog what's worth extracting, filed the report. The ship had taken significant damage in the engagement 3 days prior but hadn't gone down, which was either structural luck or something deliberate, depending on who you asked. I didn't ask. It wasn't my job to ask. What I did notice, because I noticed things that don't add up, was that the manifest listed the ship as unoccupied. I'd seen the thermal imaging report 15 minutes earlier on the same terminal. The readings didn't match an empty ship. I thought about mentioning it. Then the shuttle docked, and the airlock opened, and I heard something on the other side that wasn't machinery. It was children. I put the compass back in my pocket and picked up my kit. There were 2 guards at the airlock interior, and they had weapons drawn before I'd fully stepped through. I put my hands up, slowly, the way you do when you want to make it absolutely clear you've done this before and you know the protocol, and I said I was a contracted demobilization engineer with authorization codes I could provide if they'd give me 30 seconds. They didn't lower the weapons, but they didn't fire either, which I took as a reasonable starting point. The ship smelled wrong. Not damaged wrong, which has its own specific combination of burnt wiring and recycled air. This was something else. Crowded. Warm in the way enclosed spaces get warm when there are too many bodies in them and the ventilation isn't compensating properly. I filed that away. Ventilation on this class of Xalian vessel runs through a central processing unit on sublevel 3. If it was already struggling, it would get worse. I could hear the children clearly now. Not 1 or 2 many. The sound was coming from somewhere midship, muffled by 2 or 3 bulkheads, but unmistakable. High voices, some crying, the particular quality of noise that happens when a large number of small people are frightened and tired and have been in one place too long. The manifest had said unoccupied. I considered the possibility that the manifest had been wrong by accident. I also considered the possibility that it had been wrong on purpose. Neither option made my current situation simpler. I need to speak with whoever is in command of this vessel, I said. The guard on the left, taller, the kind of Xalian coloring that runs towards deep green in low light, said something to the other one that I didn't catch. My translation module was running, but Xalian military dialect has regional variations the standard firmware doesn't fully cover. What I got was approximately *confirms/human/weight. I waited 17 minutes, which I know because I was watching the ventilation output readings on my handheld scanner and noting the rate of degradation. I'd done a rough calculation by minute 12. The central processing unit had maybe 5 hours before the circulation in the midship residential section dropped below safe tolerance for Xalian juvenile respiratory systems. Children's lungs are more sensitive than adults. That's not specific to Xalian biology. It's more or less universal across every species I've worked around. I was thinking about this, and also about the fact that I hadn't eaten since the shuttle and there had been a meal pack in my kit that I'd left on the seat because I hadn't wanted to carry the extra weight, when the atmosphere in the corridor changed. It's hard to explain what that means exactly. It's not a sound or a temperature shift. It's more like a pressure, the way a room feels different when someone with authority walks into it, before you've consciously registered that anything has changed. I've felt it maybe 4 times in my life. I looked up from my scanner. She came down the corridor from the direction of midship with 2 additional guards flanking her and servant-equivalent aide moving slightly ahead. She was wearing what I'd later understand was a field variant of imperial dress, functional, less ceremonial than what I'd seen in briefing images, but the bearing was unmistakable. Empress Zara of the Zalian Dominion was not a tall woman by Zalian standards, but she moved like the corridor belonged to her, which technically it did. She stopped approximately 3 meters from me and looked at my equipment bag with an expression I could read clearly even across the species barrier. This is exactly what I was afraid it would be. "You are the demobilization contractor," she said. Her standard was precise, slightly formal, the kind you learn from instruction rather than conversation. "Yes. You were sent to strip this vessel." "I was sent to assess it," I said. "Assess means evaluate. It doesn't mean remove." "The distinction matters to you. The distinction is the job description." She looked at me for a moment. I had the impression she was deciding something, not about whether to believe me, but about which version of this conversation she wanted to have. "This vessel contains 212 civilian miners," she said. "They were evacuated here during the engagement when their transport was disabled. They have been here for 71 hours. 71 hours! I did the math on that automatically and didn't like the result. 71 hours in a damaged ship with a ventilation system that was already showing stress indicators meant the air quality in the residential section had been degrading for at least the last 20 of those hours. Children don't always show respiratory distress clearly until it's significant. "I know about the ventilation problem," I said. Something shifted in her expression. "Not much, a fraction of a degree of attention, the way someone looks when you've said something they weren't expecting." "Explain," she said. "The central processing unit on this class of ship runs circulation for all residential sections through a single failover system. The primary took damage. I can see the output variance on my scanner from here. The failover is compensating, but it's running above rated capacity. Based on current degradation rate, you have approximately 4 hours and 40 minutes before the circulation in midship drops below safe respiratory tolerance, for juvenile Zalian biology." I paused. "I can fix it. I know this ship class. But I need access to sublevel 3. She looked at me. I looked at her. "You are telling me," she said, "that you arrived on this vessel with authorization to dismantle it, and your first observation was a life support problem affecting the children aboard." "My first observation was that the manifest said the ship was unoccupied and the thermal imaging said otherwise," I said. "The ventilation was my second observation. And you are offering to repair it." "I'm telling you it needs to be repaired and that I can do it," I said. "Whether that's an offer depends on whether you're going to keep those guards pointing weapons at me for the next 4 hours." She was quiet for a moment. The aide beside her made a small movement, a shift of weight, the kind that means this is the moment to intervene, and she stopped it with one hand without looking at him. "Why should I trust you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. It was the shape a question makes when the person asking it already knows there's no clean answer and wants to see what you do with that. I reached into my pocket. The compass was there where it always was, the familiar weight of it, the needle that had never once done what it was supposed to do. I don't know why I took it out. I've tried to explain it to myself since, and the best I can manage is that I wanted to give her something real, and it was the realest thing I had. I put it on the equipment case between us. "I don't know why you should," I said. "But I'm asking anyway." She looked at the compass. Then at me. Then she said something to the guards in Zalian military dialect that my translation module caught clearly this time. Asterisk stand down. Let him work. Stay close. Asterisk. They gave me access to sublevel 3 and a guard who followed me at exactly 2 meters, close enough to intervene, far enough to pretend he wasn't watching every move I made. I've worked under supervision before. You learn to stop noticing it after the first hour. The sublevel was in worse shape than the scanner had suggested from the corridor. The primary circulation unit had taken a glancing hit from something that hadn't fully penetrated the hull but had been enough to shear 2 of the main coupling assemblies and crack the pressure housing on the failover intake. The failover was running on 3 of its 5 operational channels. The other 2 had shut themselves down automatically when they detected the housing crack, which was the right call, a cracked intake running at full pressure would have failed catastrophically rather than gradually. Whoever designed this ship's emergency protocols had known what they were doing. I started with the pressure housing because that was the critical point. I carry a limited repair kit. Demobilization work occasionally requires stabilizing systems before you can safely dismantle them, and I had the sealant compound and the clamps I needed, though not the exact grade of sealant the Zaliant system would have used. Close enough would have to be close enough. Zara came down to sublevel 3 40 minutes after I started. I heard her before I saw her. The guard behind me straightened, which I'd already learned was the reliable indicator, and then she was standing at the entrance to the mechanical bay watching me work. I didn't stop what I was doing. Stopping feels like an acknowledgement that you were thinking about something other than the work, and I was trying not to think about anything other than the work. The coupling assemblies, she said. Can you replace them? Not with what I have. I can stabilize the failover to full 5-channel operation, which gives you back full circulation capacity. The primary stays offline, but you don't need it if the failover is running correctly. I tightened a clamp and checked the pressure reading. Good enough to get the children off the ship safely. That's the goal. Yes, she said. That is the goal. She came further into the bay. Not to help, just to see. She crouched slightly to look at the coupling assembly I'd already stabilized, examining it with the focused attention of someone who understood what they were looking at. You used a non-Zalian sealant compound, she said. It's what I have. The viscosity rating is within tolerance. The thermal expansion coefficient is different. I stopped. Looked at the coupling. She was right. If the temperature in the bay fluctuated significantly, the differential expansion could stress the seal. I'd been working fast and I'd missed it, or not missed it exactly but filed it as acceptable, and it wasn't quite acceptable. I'll add a secondary clamp, I said. It compensates. There are Zalian repair materials in the emergency locker on this level, she said. Bay 7. The coupling sealant should be there. I looked at her. You know the emergency locker inventory for this class of vessel. I commissioned 14 ships of this class, she said. I reviewed the specifications. I went to Bay 7. The sealant was there. I came back and started over on the coupling, which cost me 20 minutes but produced a better result, and I was aware the whole time that she was still in the bay, watching, occasionally asking a technical question that was really a test to see whether I knew what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. I answered the questions directly. After a while the questions stopped, and she just watched, which was somehow more comfortable than the questions had been. We were on the 4th coupling assembly when I heard it, a small sound from the corridor outside, not a mechanical sound, and then a child appeared at the entrance to the bay. Small, maybe 4 or 5 years by Zalian developmental standards, wearing what had probably been a clean outfit 71 hours ago. She looked at Zara, then at me, then at the tools spread across the floor with the specific expression children get when they've found something interesting and are calculating whether they're allowed to be interested in it. The guard moved to redirect her. Zara stopped him with the same one-handed gesture she'd used upstairs. The child came in. She navigated around my tools with surprising care, which I appreciated, and stopped next to me and looked at the coupling assembly I was working on. Broken, she said in standard, the careful pronunciation of someone who'd learned it recently. It was, I said. Getting less broken. She considered this. Then she reached into her pocket and produced a small mechanical toy, a bird shape, Zalian design, the kind that was supposed to move its wings through some internal mechanism. She held it out to me. The wing mechanism was clearly jammed. I looked at it. I looked at the coupling assembly I was in the middle of repairing, which was time-sensitive. I looked at the child. I set down the coupling tool, took the toy, and had the wing mechanism unjammed in about 90 seconds. It was a simple friction issue, dust in the gear housing. I handed it back. She made it work twice, watching the wings move, then looked up at me with an expression of complete satisfaction and walked back out of the bay. I picked up the coupling tool and went back to work. Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You stopped a time-sensitive repair to fix a toy. It took 90 seconds. You didn't know it would take 90 seconds when you stopped." I didn't have a good answer for that, so I didn't give one. I heard the child's footsteps recede down the corridor. "The compass," Zara said. "The child will have noticed it." She was right. When I'd taken the toy, the compass had shifted in my pocket. The chain was visible above the pocket edge. Children notice things adults have learned to screen out. "Probably," I said. "She'll tell the others. They'll want to see it." "That's fine," I said. Zara was quiet again. Different quality of quiet this time. "You are not what I expected," she said. We were talking about my professional qualifications and my willingness to let children look at a compass. We were absolutely talking about that. "What did you expect?" I said. "Someone who would tell me the repair was outside his authorization and wait for instructions. That would have taken longer than 4 hours." "Yes," she said. "It would have." I finished the fourth coupling and moved to the fifth. The ventilation output on my scanner was already showing improvement, 2 percentage points in the right direction, not enough yet but moving. Another 90 minutes and the residential section would be back to full safe circulation. I thought about the child and her toy. I thought about 71 hours in a damaged ship. I thought about how Zara had known exactly where the emergency sealant was stored, and how she'd crouched down to look at my work the way someone crouches down when they actually want to understand something rather than just observe it. I had revised my initial assessment of her 3 times since she'd walked into this bay. I was aware that I was probably still wrong about several things. That awareness didn't help me identify which things. The compass shifted in my pocket. The needle, as always, pointed left of nowhere. The ventilation was back to full capacity by the time I finished the 5th coupling. I ran the diagnostics twice because I don't trust a single pass on life support work. The first pass tells you what it found, the second pass tells you whether the first pass missed anything. Both came back clean. I filed the readings on my scanner and started packing my tools. Zara was still in the bay. She'd been there for the entire 2 hours, not continuously. She'd left twice to deal with things I wasn't part of and came back both times without explanation, which I respected. People who feel the need to explain their exits are usually managing your perception of them. She didn't seem interested in managing my perception of her. "It's done," I said. "Circulation is stable. The failover will run at full capacity for approximately 3 weeks before the coupling sealant needs inspection. After that, it depends on conditions. 3 weeks is sufficient," she said. "The evacuation ships arrive in 14 hours. 14 hours. I did the arithmetic on that too. If the evacuation ships were 14 hours out, she'd known they were coming when she arrived, which meant she'd come here not because she had a rescue in progress but because she needed to be here herself, in person, before anyone else arrived. I thought about why an empress would do that. I thought about 212 children who had been on a damaged ship for 71 hours with adults who were trying to keep them calm, and about what it would mean to those children to see her walk through that airlock personally. It wasn't a political calculation. Or it was, but it wasn't only that. I closed my kit. "I'll file the assessment report as non-viable for demobilization. The ship can be returned to your fleet once the primary circulation unit is replaced." "That is acceptable," she said. We were talking about paperwork. We were definitely talking about paperwork. I followed her back up from sublevel 3 to the main residential corridor, because the exit was that direction and there was no reason not to. The difference in the air was immediately noticeable. The circulation was moving properly now, the staleness that had been sitting in the corridor when I arrived was already clearing. Small things. The kind of thing you only register when you've been paying attention to the wrong version of it for 2 hours. The children were visible now. Some were in the corridor, supervised by Zalian adults who looked exhausted in the specific way of people who have been maintaining calm for other people's benefit for a long time. A few of the children looked up when we passed. The one from the bay, the one with the toy bird, was sitting against the corridor wall with 3 others, wings of the toy bird moving in her hands. She looked at me and then at the compass chain visible above my pocket with an expression of clear intent. I stopped, took the compass out, and held it where she could see it. She came over, and the 3 others came with her because children travel in groups when something interesting is happening. I showed them the needle. Explained, in the simplest standard I could manage, that it was broken and always pointed the same direction. One of them asked why I kept it. I told them my father gave it to me. They absorbed this with the complete seriousness children bring to explanations they've decided to believe. Zara was watching from 2 meters away. I was aware of it but didn't look up. The girl with the toy bird pointed at the compass and said something in Zalian I didn't catch. I looked at Zara. She says it looks like a finding stone, Zara said. It is a Zalian object. Children carry them. They are supposed to lead you back to where you belong. Does it work? I said. They are stones, she said. They do not work. A pause. Children believe they do. I looked at the compass in my hand. The needle pointed left of nowhere, steady as always. Same principle, I said. Zara looked at the compass. Then at me. I put it back in my pocket, and the children dispersed back to what they'd been doing with the immediate completeness children have, moving on to the next thing without ceremony. We kept walking. The corridor opened into a larger common area where most of the children were gathered, supervised, settled, some sleeping against the walls on emergency bedding. The Zalian adults managing them looked up when Zara entered. The quality of the room changed the same way it had changed in the corridor when she'd arrived, a collective exhale, something releasing that had been held. She walked through the room and spoke to each of the supervising adults briefly. I stayed near the entrance because it wasn't my room to move through and I know when I'm background. I watched her. She knew each adult's name. She crouched down twice to speak to children at eye level. She didn't perform any of it. It wasn't the practiced warmth of someone running through a protocol. She just did it the way you do something you've done before and mean. I had revised my assessment again. I'd lost count of which revision this was. She came back to where I was standing, and we walked toward the airlock. Either of us spoke for a moment. The adults in there, I said. How long have they worked for you? The youngest has been with me for 6 years, she said. The eldest for 19. They were scared, I said. Not of the situation. Of telling you what the situation had been. When you walked in. She was quiet for 3 steps. Yes. But they stayed with the children anyway. For 71 hours. Yes, she said again. That's not nothing, I said. She looked at me sideways, not the evaluating look from earlier, something different. Like I'd said something she'd already thought but hadn't expected to hear from this direction. No, she said. It is not nothing. We reached the airlock corridor. My shuttle was through the airlock, on the dock, waiting. My job here was done, the assessment was filed, the repair was complete. There was no professional reason to be anywhere on this ship except walking toward the exit. I stopped at the equipment case where I'd left the compass during the standoff earlier. It was still there. I picked it up. Your people will debrief me, I said. Standard post-access protocol for contracted personnel. Yes, she said. I'll cooperate fully. I assumed you would. I looked at the airlock. Then I said, because I was tired and the filter between thinking something and saying it gets thinner when I'm tired. The children are going to be all right. The ones who were showing early respiratory symptoms, they'll clear within 24 hours now that the circulation is fixed. The younger ones especially recover fast. She looked at me. You assess the children. I noticed, I said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that I thought the conversation was over and started to reach for the airlock control. Callan, she said. It was the first time she'd used my name. My actual name, not contractor or human. My translation module had rendered it with the Zalian pronunciation, which shifts the stress to the second syllable, and it sounded different that way. Not wrong, just different, like hearing a familiar word in a room with better acoustics. I stopped. The children will remember this ship, she said. They will remember being frightened here. But the ones who spoke to you today, she paused. They will also remember the man with the broken compass who fixed the bird toy. Those are not the same memory. I didn't know what to say to that. I stood there for a second, failing to produce a response. Go file your report, she said. And the formal register was back, the door closed, the Empress rather than whoever had been speaking 30 seconds ago. Debrief will be scheduled through standard channels. I went through the airlock. I was 3 steps down the dock before I noticed my hand was in my pocket, holding the compass. The needle was doing what it always did, pointing left of nowhere. I told myself I wasn't thinking about the way she'd said my name. I was lying. The debrief happened 2 days later in a neutral station facility, standard procedure for any contracted personnel who'd had unsupervised access to a foreign vessel, even supervised access, even access that had been explicitly authorized by the vessel's owner who also happened to be an Empress. Bureaucracy doesn't make exceptions for context. I've always found that oddly comforting. The Xalian debrief officer was efficient and thorough and asked me the same questions in 4 different formations to see if my answers changed. They didn't. I described what I'd found, what I'd repaired, what materials I'd used, what I'd observed. I left nothing out, including the compass, the toy bird, the children in the corridor, because leaving things out of a debrief is the fastest way to make something look like it needs to be hidden. The officer made notes. At the end, she said, in the flat tone of someone delivering information rather than opinion, the Empress has filed a commendation for your conduct on behalf of the Xalian Dominion. It will be attached to your contractor record. I said thank you. She said it wasn't her commendation to accept thanks for. I left. I thought about the commendation for approximately 40 minutes on the transit back to my accommodation, and then I put it in the same category as the compass, something I didn't entirely understand and wasn't going to resolve by thinking harder about it, and I went back to work. Work, for the next 11 days, was 3 smaller contracts on the same station. Routine assessments, nothing requiring the kind of improvisation the Xalian flagship had needed. I was grateful for routine. Routine doesn't ask questions. On the 12th day, I got a message through the station's official diplomatic communication channel. My name, correct contractor identification, formal Xalian header. The message itself was 4 sentences. Asterisk, the children have been resettled. All are well. The respiratory cases cleared within 18 hours of evacuation, as you predicted. The Empress thanks you for your service. Asterisk. It was signed with a formal title and a seal. Not a name. I read it twice. I wrote a reply that said, asterisk, glad to hear it. Thank you for letting me know. Asterisk, I deleted that and wrote, asterisk, I'm relieved to hear the children recovered well. Thank you for the update. Asterisk, I looked at that for a while and sent it before I could revise it again. Nothing came back. I didn't expect anything to. I finished the 3 contracts. I filed my reports. I took a new assignment on a station 2 systems away because that was the work, and the work was what I did. I packed my kit, checked the compass out of habit, needle pointing left of nowhere, as always, and got on the transit shuttle. I was in the departure lounge when someone sat down next to me. Not next to me exactly. 2 seats away, which on an otherwise empty row of seating is a deliberate choice rather than a proximity default. I registered it without looking up from my scanner because I register most things. Then I registered the specific quality of the silence 2 seats away, and I looked up. Zara was not dressed as an Empress. This sounds simple, and it wasn't. She was wearing civilian transit clothing, good quality, understated, nothing that marked her as anything except someone who traveled and knew how to do it without drawing attention. Her hair was different. No aide. No guards that I could immediately identify, though I revised that assumption quickly. There were 2 people in the lounge who were sitting in positions that covered all the entry points, and had the same quality of relaxed watchfulness as the guards on the flagship. Plain clothes, good sight lines. Better than the obvious detail. She was looking at her own scanner. She didn't look up when I looked at her. I looked back at my scanner. Then I said, at a volume calibrated for 2 seats of distance in a quiet lounge, "This is a coincidence. The station has 1 departure lounge," she said without looking up. "All transits leave from here." "That's not what I meant." "I know," she said. We sat in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that has content. "The children," I said. "You mentioned they'd been resettled." "Yes. All 212. 214, she said. 2 were born on the ship during the 71 hours. Early arrivals, both healthy." I hadn't known that. I sat with it for a second. 2 children who had started their lives on a damaged ship with broken ventilation, arrived into a crisis, and come out the other side of it fine. There was probably a metaphor in there somewhere. I left it alone. "Where are you going?" I said. "Negotiations on Vera Station," she said. "You. Demobilization assessment. Former mining platform, Sector 9. Routine work. Usually," I said. "I've learned not to assume." She looked up from her scanner then, directly at me, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had in the mechanical bay on the flagship, not the Empress, the person who had crouched down to examine a coupling assembly because she actually wanted to understand it. "The commendation," she said. "Did it cause problems with your contractor status?" "No. It helped, actually. Some clients are more comfortable hiring someone with a Zalian commendation on record." "Good," she said. "That was the intention. We were talking about professional documentation. We were completely talking about professional documentation." "You came to the debrief station yourself," I said. "You didn't have to do that. A formal commendation can be filed remotely. I had other business on that station," she said. I looked at her. "Did you?" I said. She held my gaze for exactly long enough that the answer was clear, and then she looked back at her scanner. "The transit board's in 11 minutes. "I know," I said. I looked at my own scanner. The departure information hadn't changed. 11 minutes was 11 minutes. I thought about the flagship. About the mechanical bay and the coupling assembly, and the way she'd known exactly where the emergency sealant was stored. About the child with the toy bird. About my name in her pronunciation, stress on the second syllable, in a corridor outside an airlock. About 4 sentences in a formal message that had taken me 3 drafts to respond to with 2. I thought about the compass in my pocket, pointing left of nowhere the way it always had. "The finding stone," I said. "What the child said? Does the belief have a specific origin or is it general cultural?" She was quiet for a moment, considering the question, or deciding whether she wanted to answer it. "There is a story," she said. "Old. A navigator who was lost returns home by following a stone that pointed toward everything he had left behind. The stone didn't point north. It pointed toward what mattered to him." She paused. "It is a children's story. It is not meant to be taken literally. Most useful stories aren't literally true," I said. "No," she said. "They are not." The departure announcement came over the station speakers. Her transit first, mine 4 minutes after. She stood. Picked up her bag with the practiced efficiency of someone who travels constantly and has reduced the process to its minimum components. She looked at me. I looked at her. We were in a departure lounge with 11 other people and 2 undercover security personnel, and I was aware of all of them and none of them at the same time. "Safe transit," she said. "You too," I said. She walked toward the gate. I watched her go, not obviously, just the way you watch something when you're trying to decide whether to say something else and running out of time to decide. I put my hand in my pocket. The compass was there. I took it out. Looked at the needle. Left of nowhere, same as always, same as it had been since I was 9 years old. Except. I turned slightly in my seat, the way you shift when a transit lounge seat is uncomfortable, nothing deliberate about it. The needle didn't move. I turned back. It didn't move. I turned toward the gate she'd walked through. The needle shifted. 1 degree. Maybe 2. I looked at it for a long time. Then I picked up my bag, walked to the transit desk, and changed my connection routing through Vera Station. It was a 12-hour detour. The mining platform assessment could wait 1 day. I told myself it was a reasonable decision. I was possibly lying again. Vera Station was larger than I'd expected and more crowded than made sense for its listed population, which meant the listed population was wrong or the station served as a transit hub for something not in the public directory. Probably both. I've worked in enough places to recognize when official documentation and physical reality have stopped talking to each other. I cleared customs in 40 minutes. Zalian commendation on my contractor record turned out to expedite things here too, which was either a useful coincidence or not a coincidence at all, and came out into the main transit concourse with 12 hours to spend and no legitimate reason to be there. I found a place to eat. Ordered something I didn't recognize from the menu and received something that turned out to be acceptable, which is about the best outcome you can hope for when ordering blind. I sat at a counter facing the concourse and watched people move through it, and thought about what exactly I was doing. The honest answer was, I didn't know. I'd changed my routing on the evidence of a compass needle moving 1 degree, which is the kind of decision-making process that sounds insane when you describe it plainly. I'm a person who works in precise measurements. I catalog tolerances and load ratings and material grades. I do not reroute transits because of 1 degree of needle movement in an object that has never functioned correctly in 3 decades. And yet here I was on Vera Station eating unidentified food. I finished eating. I walked the concourse. I found the conference sector where the negotiations were presumably happening and confirmed that it was, in fact, happening. There was alien diplomatic insignia visible on 2 of the personnel moving through the sector entrance, and a security perimeter that was professional enough to be official and relaxed enough to mean things were going well inside. I didn't try to get closer. I wasn't there to interrupt anything. I wasn't entirely sure what I was there for. I found an observation deck on the station's outer ring and sat there for an hour watching ships move in the docking pattern outside. It's something I do when I need to think without thinking. The movement is regular enough to be calming and variable enough to keep the surface of your attention occupied while whatever is underneath does what it needs to do. What was underneath, when I finally paid attention to it, was something I'd been successfully not looking at directly for 12 days. I'd thought about her every day since the flagship. Not constantly, not dramatically, just the way a recurring calculation keeps showing up in the background of other work. The coupling assembly she'd caught. The way she'd moved through the room of exhausted children. The 4-sentence message and what it had and hadn't said. The departure lounge and the 11 minutes and asterisk I had other business on that station. Asterisk. I'm not a person who makes decisions based on feelings I can't verify. I'm also not a person who pretends something isn't happening when it clearly is. These 2 facts had been in conflict for 12 days and I hadn't resolved them, and changing my transit routing apparently meant I'd decided to stop pretending and start doing something about the conflict instead. What I was going to do about it, specifically, I had not worked out. My scanner notified me that a message had come through the station's communications system. Formal header. Zalian diplomatic seal. Asterisk, you are on Vera Station. Your routing records indicate this is not on your contracted path. Is there a problem with your transit? Asterisk. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. I looked at the message for a moment. No problem, I wrote back. Asterisk 12-hour layover. Routing error. Asterisk. I send it. 3 minutes passed. Asterisk routing errors in contracted transit are flagged for review. I will ensure yours is cleared. Asterisk. I read that twice. That's not necessary, I wrote. Asterisk, it was a voluntary rerouting. Not an error. Asterisk. 4 minutes this time. Asterisk, then it was a deliberate choice. Asterisk. Yes, I wrote. 6 minutes. Asterisk, Vera Station has a good observation deck on the outer ring. Most transit passengers miss it. Asterisk. I looked up from my scanner. The observation deck was not listed in any of the public station directories I'd checked. I'd found it by walking until I found something that looked like it might be what I was looking for. I wrote, asterisk, I found it. Asterisk. I know, she wrote back. Asterisk, you've been there for an hour. Asterisk. I sat with that for a moment. The undercover security from the departure lounge, or their equivalents here, of course. She knew I was on the station the moment I cleared customs. Possibly before. How are the negotiations going? I wrote. Not because I needed to know, but because I wanted to see what she'd do with a direct question about something she might not want to discuss. They are going, she wrote. Asterisk, that is the most accurate description. Asterisk. Asterisk, that sounds like they're difficult. Asterisk. Asterisk, all negotiations are difficult. These ones are also tedious, which is worse. Asterisk. I almost smiled at that. I caught myself, and then decided there was no one on the observation deck to catch me at it, and let it happen. How much longer? I wrote. Asterisk, the formal sessions conclude tomorrow midday. There is a reception in the evening which I am required to attend. After that I am no longer required to be anywhere specific for approximately 4 hours before my transit departs. Asterisk. I read that 3 times to make sure I was reading it correctly. It was written in precise formal standard, and it was also the least ambiguous thing she had said to me since the flagship. 4 hours is a reasonable amount of time, I wrote. Yes, she wrote. Asterisk, it is. Asterisk. I put the scanner down and looked out at the ships moving in the docking pattern. The station's running lights were cycling through their evening sequence, the concourse behind me shifting from transit busy to recreation busy as the station's internal clock moved toward what passed for night here. The compass was in my pocket. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. I stayed on the observation deck for another hour. Then I found accommodation for the night, nothing elaborate, the kind of room that exists purely for the function of sleeping in it, and I lay there in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow midday and a reception and 4 hours after that. I thought about the flagship and sublevel 3 and a child with a toy bird. I thought about a departure lounge and a 4-sentence message. I thought about I had other business on that station and what it meant that she told me that directly, knowing I'd understand what it meant. I thought about the compass and the Finding Stone story and a navigator who found his way back to everything he'd left behind. I wasn't lost. I'd never thought of myself as lost. But I was starting to think that wasn't quite the same thing as knowing where you belong. The ceiling didn't have any answers. Ceilings rarely do. I closed my eyes and listened to the station's ventilation system, properly calibrated, full capacity, running exactly as it should, and eventually I slept. In the morning there was one more message. Asterisk, the observation deck has a better view in the early hours. The docking pattern is less congested. Asterisk. It had been sent at 0340 station time. I checked the timestamp on my reply from last night. She'd sent this message 8 minutes after I'd gone offline. I sat with that for a long time. Then I got up, made something that the room's provisions system described as coffee and which was close enough, and went back to the observation deck to watch the early morning docking pattern. I wasn't expecting her to be there. She was there. Not in diplomatic dress, the same civilian transit clothes as yesterday, same quality, different color. She was standing at the viewport with her back to the entrance, looking out at the ships, and she didn't turn around when I came in. I came and stood next to her. Not 2 seats away. Next to her. We looked at the docking pattern for a while. You couldn't sleep either, I said. I slept adequately, she said. I woke early. There's a difference. Yes, she said. There is. We stood there in the early station morning watching ships come and go, and neither of us said anything for a while, and the silence was the most comfortable thing I'd felt in 12 days. We stayed on the observation deck for 2 hours. Not talking the entire time, mostly watching the docking pattern, occasionally saying something about nothing in particular. She pointed out a Zalian cargo configuration I hadn't seen before. I explained why the station's docking approach vectors were inefficient. Normal conversation. The kind that doesn't announce itself as important while it's happening. At some point she said, without introduction, "The children ask about you." The ones from the ship. There is apparently a story circulating among them about a man with a broken compass who could fix anything. I couldn't fix the primary circulation unit, I said. They are children, she said. The story has been improved. I looked at her. She was still watching the ships. Something at the corner of her expression was doing something I didn't have a word for yet. The compass, she said. May I see it? I took it out and held it where she could see. The needle moved, the same slow shift I'd seen in the departure lounge, toward her, 1 or 2 degrees off its usual fixed point. She saw it. I know she saw it because she went very still. That didn't happen before, I said. Not in 30 years. She looked at the needle for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket and took out something small, old, Zalian design, worn smooth at the edges. A finding stone, actual stone, with a faint directional marking carved into its surface. My mother gave me this, she said. It is supposed to point toward what matters. She paused. It has not moved in 19 years. Not since she died. She held it next to my compass. The marking rotated slowly. Stopped. It was pointing at me. Either of us spoke. Outside, ships moved in their patient docking patterns, indifferent to what was happening on the observation deck. This doesn't solve anything, I said. Your life and mine are not compatible in any practical sense. No, she said. They are not. But. She looked at me. But. We stood there with a broken compass and a finding stone between us, both of them finally working, either of us pretending we didn't know what that meant. She had a reception to attend. I had a mining platform to assess. The universe had not rearranged itself to make any of this simple. She put the finding stone back in her pocket. I put the compass in mine. 4 hours, she said. 4 hours, I said. It wasn't enough. It was a start.